August 2023, western Montana. A lightning storm rolled across the Bitterroot Range, setting off a dozen small blazes that kept local crews scrambling for weeks. On the third day of containment, a helicopter crew spotted something metallic glinting through smoke at the base of a ravine near Trapper Peak. At first, they thought it was a burned-out camper. When firefighters rappelled down, they realized the metal was faded blue, not charred, paint, not ash. It was an old pickup, wedged nose first against the rocks. Moss covered most of the frame. Trees had grown through the bed. The front plate was gone, but the rear tag was still there, half rusted, but legible. MT 4KJ 217. Dispatch went quiet for a moment. That plate had been entered into the missing vehicle database in 1999. The name attached to it was Robert and Lily Hammond, a father and his 10-year-old daughter who'd vanished on a weekend camping trip 24 years earlier. The case had been one of Montana's longest open missing persons files. Back then, Robert Hammond was 38, a mechanic from Missoula, who spent weekends fishing and photographing mountain lakes. His daughter Lily was bright, fearless, obsessed with insects and cameras, forever insisting on adventures. On the morning of June 12, 1999, they'd told neighbors they were heading toward Trapper Lake for 2 days, one last camping trip before school starts again. They never returned. When they missed Sunday dinner with family, searchers fanned out through the valley. Helicopters, dogs, volunteers, nothing. Their pickup, a blue 1986 Ford F-150, was gone. No tire tracks, no scent trails, no sign of camp or campfire. The sheriff at the time called it a clean vanish. For years, theories divided locals. Some blamed flash flooding from summer storms. Others whispered about backroad trespassers or even grizzly attacks. A few insisted the father had driven them into Canada to start over. Every anniversary, the Missoulian newspaper reran their photos. Robert smiling in a ball cap, Lily with 2 missing teeth, holding a fishing pole twice her height. Now, in 2023, the mountains had finally spoken. When the recovery crew reached the cab, they found the windows intact but clouded. Inside was a world perfectly preserved by altitude and cold. Maps on the seat, a thermos rolling under the brake, a child's purple flashlight wedged in the console, but there were no remains. The passenger door hung open just a crack, as if someone had tried to climb out. Firefighters marked the coordinates and radioed the sheriff's office. Within hours, detectives and forensic teams were flown in. Among them was Detective Sarah Nguyen, who had grown up in Hamilton hearing the story of the father and daughter who disappeared up the hill. Now, she stood over the rusted Ford, wind slicing through the canyon. "It waited until we were ready to look," she said quietly. Initial inspection showed the truck had rolled roughly 200 feet down the slope, likely after sliding off a washed-out logging road. Its tires were deflated, but intact. The ignition key was still in place, turned halfway. A camera bag sat in the back seat, Lily's. Inside were 3 undeveloped disposable cameras. The film had degraded, but forensic labs hoped to salvage images. Searchers expanded the perimeter. 50 yards uphill, they found a collapsed tent site, old poles, fragments of nylon, a melted flashlight. The campsite had been buried under rockslide debris, probably during one of the storms that summer. What stunned investigators was the location. The site was above the road, not below it. That meant Robert and Lily had made camp safely, and later, maybe at night, driven again. But why? 2 days later, the lab called with results from the camera roll. Only 6 frames were recoverable. The first showed Lily holding a dragonfly near the lake. The next, Robert crouched beside their campfire, smiling. The last photo, time-stamped, 8:42 p.m., captured taillights and fog, red streaks bending downward into darkness. It was the last moment anyone had ever seen them. Detective Nguyen pieced together the old case file. In 1999, weather logs confirmed a violent storm hit the valley that evening. Heavy rain, thunder, near-zero visibility. If they'd tried to drive back to town, even a small misjudgment could have sent them off the narrow dirt road. Yet something still didn't fit. The truck's gear shift was in park, its lights were off, and the driver's seatbelt had been unbuckled manually. That suggested they'd survive the fall, at least long enough to shut the engine and try to escape. Search teams combed the ravine for a mile downstream. On the third day, they found a child's hiking boot wedged in driftwood. The leather had dried stiff, but inside was a fragment of cloth, a piece of denim that matched the jacket Lily wore in every missing poster photo. The media exploded. Father and daughter case reopened after 24 years. National outlets called it Montana's longest echo. Locals poured in with old memories. A former hunter swore he'd seen smoke in that valley the week after they vanished, but assumed it was campers. A retired fire spotter admitted he'd logged an unidentified reflection near Trapper Peak in 2000, like a mirror flashing sunlight. At the time, no one followed up. Now every scrap of old testimony felt like a clue finally connecting. When the second search phase began, crews brought metal detectors and cadaver dogs. The scent teams hit immediately near a dry creek bed half a mile from the truck. Beneath layers of pine needles, they found a rusted camping stove, a dented thermos lid, and, buried deeper, 2 shallow depressions in the soil, roughly human-sized. DNA confirmed what everyone suspected, Robert and Lily Hammond. But that wasn't the end of the story. Because just beyond the graves, wedged between 2 stones, investigators found a sealed plastic food container. Inside, wrapped in wax paper, was a note written in pencil, weathered but legible. It read, "To whoever finds this, truck gone, can't climb out, fire went out last night. Lily's sleeping. I'll stay until she wakes up. Tell my wife we tried. Tell her the mountain is beautiful." It was signed R.H. The handwriting matched Robert's. Reporters called it the note that broke Montana's heart. Detective Nguyen read it twice before folding it back into evidence. She whispered, "He died looking after her." By the following week, the recovery was complete. The remains were sent for analysis, the truck hoisted out by helicopter. When it rose through the smoke-tinged air, hundreds watched from the ridge. The blue paint caught sunlight for the first time in 24 years. Brief, blinding, almost holy. At the debrief that evening, Nguyen pinned the note to the corkboard above the case file. "Official cause," she said, "accidental fall, survival attempt, exposure." Then she paused. But the real cause, love, and a road that shouldn't have existed. Outside, thunder rolled again over the Bitterroots, echoing against stone. The same kind of storm that had hidden them all those years ago had now uncovered them. And somewhere in that sound, faint and low, it almost felt like the mountain whispering back the words he'd written. "The mountain is beautiful." The photographs arrived from the forensic lab in a plain brown envelope. Detective Sarah Nguyen opened it alone, lights dimmed, hands steady. Inside were 6 prints, grainy but clear enough to bring the past back into focus. The first few images were familiar. The same camp the search team had found buried above the road. Robert crouched beside a fire ring, his baseball cap shadowing his face. Lily grinned at the camera, her cheeks smudged with marshmallow. In another, the sky over Trapper Peak burned orange at sunset. The 5th image, though, felt different. It showed Robert standing by the truck, headlights off, rain blurring the background. He wasn't posing. He was looking away, toward something out of frame. The 6th photo was nearly black, except for a reflection of light, a curved glare, like water running over glass. Lab technicians couldn't identify the source. Nguyen stared at the sequence for a long time. Each frame felt like a breadcrumb left in reverse order. Joy, worry, uncertainty, then darkness. The case had officially closed with the discovery of the truck and graves, But the story had just begun to settle into the collective conscience of Montana. Local news called it the Ravine reunion. The Hammonds were buried together in Missoula, a joint service that filled the small church with neighbors, rescue volunteers, and strangers who had grown up seeing their faces on missing posters. During the service, Robert's wife, Elaine, read the final line of his note aloud. Her voice broke, but she kept reading. "Tell her the mountain is beautiful." When she finished, there wasn't a sound left in the room, except wind moving through the church rafters. After the burial, Nguyen stayed behind with the coroner, who handed her a small envelope. "This was in the father's pocket," he said. Inside was a metal keychain, a flat silver oval, engraved with a date, 6/12/99, the day they left home. It wasn't just a memento. It was a custom tag, often used to attach spare keys under truck bumpers. Investigators went back to the crash site, retraced every inch of the ravine, and found it wedged between roots halfway up the slope. A small, rusted metal box. Inside lay a single ignition key wrapped in duct tape and another folded page of Robert's handwriting. "She's hurt but awake. I can see the lights up top when the fog breaks. Going to climb again at first light. If I don't make it, she will. She's brave. She's everything good I ever did." The handwriting trembled but was legible. The line underneath wasn't his. It was written in a child's uneven scrawl. "Daddy says we'll see stars soon." Lily must have added it while he wrote. That small exchange changed how everyone saw the case. What once felt like tragedy now carried quiet grace. A father comforting his daughter until the end. A child answering with hope. Weeks later, when the fire-scarred ravine finally cooled, a volunteer crew returned to clear debris. They uncovered a melted film canister near the gravesite, a different brand from the one found in the truck. The film was partially destroyed, but one frame survived. The inside of the tent, faint lamplight, Robert's hand holding Lily's. No faces, no background, just the touch. National outlets ran the photo everywhere. The image appeared on front pages under headlines like, "They never stopped holding on." Donations flooded into the county search and rescue fund, enough to build a new training facility named after them, the Hammond Recovery Center. In Missoula, the story sparked something deeper. A reckoning about how easily wilderness swallows mistakes. Local rangers revisited every missing person file from the 1980s and 90s, mapping trails long erased by landslides. Several small memorials were added along the Bitterroot backroads. A signpost, a plaque, a wildflower garden. Nguyen kept working the paper trail anyway. She wanted to know why the truck had ended up on that road. According to maps from 1999, it wasn't even marked, an old logging cut from the 1970s that had collapsed in the early 80s. Only someone with a local's instincts could have found it. She began to suspect Robert had taken it deliberately, maybe looking for a faster route back before the storm. But the navigation logs in his glove box told a stranger story. His map had a pencil mark leading away from Trapper Lake, down a dotted line labeled Service Road 43B, a route that never existed. When she cross-checked it against modern satellite images, a faint clearing matched that trajectory, exactly where the truck had fallen. It wasn't a road at all. It was a dry creek bed that looked like one from above. Somewhere along the way, Robert had mistaken the drainage path for a road and turned right into it. Once the rain started, the clay would have slicked like oil. They probably slid in seconds. Nguyen closed the file for the second time. Official conclusion: loss of control during severe weather. Survival attempt unsuccessful. Yet she couldn't shake a smaller mystery. The letters scratched on the inside of the truck's driver's side door. Faint but visible under rust. LH and a small star. Forensic analysts determined they'd been carved from the inside, likely with a pocket knife. Lily's mark. It must have been her final act, a message she thought no one would ever see. A year later, the recovered photos went on display at the new rescue center. Beneath them, a plaque read, "In memory of Robert and Lily Hammond, who taught us that even in loss, courage leaves a light to follow." Visitors still left flowers by the frame showing the tent-light hands. Nguyen visited once a month, sitting quietly in the corner, listening to the soft hum of the dehumidifiers and the sound of wind outside. Sometimes, late in the evening when the gallery emptied, she swore she could hear faint laughter echo from the vents, a child's giggle mixed with a man's calm voice, the sound of comfort replaying through time. She never mentioned it to anyone. In spring 2025, a wildfire cut through the Bitterroot Range again. Crews using thermal drones spotted new collapses near the old ravine, revealing fresh rock faces. When Nguyen hiked in to inspect the area, she found something waiting near the base, a small wooden cross, recently carved, initials R and L burned into the surface. No one claimed responsibility. The mountain, it seemed, hadn't finished speaking. She left it there, whispering what everyone in town had said since the discovery. They found their way home. The snow returned to the Bitterroots earlier than expected that year, soft and heavy, muffling the valley into silence. By late October 2024, most of the search trails near Trapper Peak had been closed for the season. Only a few crews remained in the upper ranges, fire lookouts, forestry rangers, and volunteer teams helping to clear storm debris before the deep freeze set in. Detective Sarah Nguyen hadn't planned to go back. She told herself the Hammond case was closed, that nothing new would come from haunting the same ravine where the blue truck had been found. But closure, she had learned, was a word invented for paperwork. For families and investigators, there was only the next call. It came on a Thursday morning. A volunteer firefighter named Mark Ridley had been inspecting erosion barriers about half a mile north of the Hammond site when he spotted something unnatural jutting from the embankment. Wood, not stone. He brushed away the dirt and found the corner of a weathered box, about the size of a lunch pail, sealed tight with rusted clasps. It looked too deliberate to be trash, he said later, like somebody meant to bury it where the water wouldn't touch it. When Nguyen arrived, snow was falling sideways. The box was heavier than it looked, wood swollen but intact. She crouched under a tarp while her flashlight caught faint carvings along the lid. LH scratched above a crude star, the same symbol Lily had carved inside the truck door. The box contained only 2 items, a child's drawing folded several times, and a small Polaroid photo, water-stained but visible. The drawing showed a mountain, 2 stick figures holding hands, and above them, a sun with long, uneven rays. At the bottom, written in a shaky hand, was a sentence. "Daddy says the sun never goes out, even when you can't see it." Nguyen closed her eyes. The Polaroid beside it showed a close-up of Robert's face, taken by Lily, half grin, wind blowing through his hair, the kind of candid photo only a child could take. Behind him was the edge of the same ravine where they'd later be found. The photo had been taken the day they vanished. When the evidence reached the lab, technicians confirmed the Polaroid was genuine, dated June 12, 1999, but the chemical aging showed something unexpected. It had been exposed to light, developed years later, not in 1999. That meant someone had opened the sealed camera after the fact. Nguyen stared at the report for an hour, running through possibilities. Had Lily developed it before they died using sunlight? Impossible. Polaroids self-develop immediately after exposure. Had someone found the camera earlier, years before the firefighters? If so, why had they hidden the box again instead of reporting it? That question ate at her. She tracked down Ridley, the firefighter who found it, and pressed him for details. "Could it have been planted recently?" she asked. He shook his head. No chance. The dirt was compacted like concrete. It had been there decades. Then how was the film fresh? He looked away. Maybe the cold kept it alive. It didn't add up, but nothing about the Hammond story ever really had. By December, the mountain closed again. Drifts buried the ravine entrances, sealing everything under ice. Nguyen spent Christmas alone in her apartment, reading the old search reports from 1999 by lamplight. She noticed something she'd missed before, an early volunteer statement from a man named Jim Harker, a logger who'd helped with the first week of searching. His account had been dismissed back then as unreliable. He'd claimed to have seen a flicker of light deep in the forest 3 nights after the Hammonds went missing. Like a lantern waving, he'd said. Search teams found nothing at that location. 25 years later, with the Polaroid now proven to have been exposed after the disappearance, Harker's words hit differently. Nguyen wondered if what he saw wasn't a lantern, but the camera flash. She reopened his file. The coordinates matched within half a mile of where the truck would eventually be found. The mountain, she thought, had tried to tell them everything. They just hadn't known how to listen. In February 2025, when the first thaw came, a joint memorial hike was organized by the new Hammond Recovery Center. Rangers, locals, and rescue families gathered at the trailhead with flowers and lanterns. The snowmelt made the creek roar beneath the bridge, carrying fragments of ice downstream. Nguyen joined quietly at the back. She wasn't there to be seen. Elaine Hammond, Robert's widow, stood near the ridge holding a bouquet of lilies. She looked older than her years, but her voice carried when she spoke to the group. For 24 years, this mountain kept my family, she said softly. And when it was time, it gave them back. I don't hate it for that. I thank it. A hush followed her words. The group placed their lanterns at the edge of the slope, letting the flickering light drift into dusk. As the crowd dispersed, Nguyen lingered. She climbed a little higher, boots crunching in crusted snow, until she reached the clearing above the ravine. There, half buried in frost, was a piece of metal catching the last sunlight. She brushed it clean. It was part of the truck's rear-view mirror, shattered long ago. The reflection threw her own face back in fragments, fractured and ghostly. For a moment, the wind through the canyon sounded like a voice, thin, childlike, carried on the current. Daddy says the sun never goes out. She froze. The air around her stilled. Then the wind shifted and it was gone. She didn't tell anyone what she'd heard. In March, a fire crew performing post-winter inspections discovered another clue. This time, not from the Hammonds, but from the storm itself. Near the site, a deep crevice had opened where the ground had collapsed further down the slope. Inside were fragments of metal and glass, apparently from a second vehicle. The VIN number traced to a local rancher named Daniel Reeves, who had gone missing in 2001 while delivering feed supplies to a neighboring property. His body had been found years later on a different ridge miles away, but this vehicle, his old pickup, had never been located. The proximity of both crash sites led investigators to re-examine the entire terrain. What they discovered changed everything. Using LiDAR scans, geologists mapped an ancient drainage pattern running beneath the area, essentially a series of natural false roads carved by centuries of runoff. They realized that Robert Hammond hadn't been the only one misled. The supposed backroads shown on outdated maps were illusions, channels that appeared drivable until the ground gave way. The Bitterroot Range had swallowed more people than anyone realized. Nguyen published a detailed report which prompted the state to fund new safety surveys and restrict vehicle access in several wilderness zones. It was small justice, but it felt like purpose. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about the Polaroid, the one that shouldn't have been developed. When spring came, she requested permission to visit the Hammond graves. Elaine met her there. The two women talked quietly under the cottonwoods, the grass bright and new. Nguyen finally asked, Did Robert ever use Polaroids before that trip? Elaine nodded. He gave Lily one of those instant cameras for her 10th birthday. Said it was so she could see the picture before it faded from her mind. She never went anywhere without it. Nguyen hesitated. Did you ever find any photos from that trip? Ones they mailed or left behind? Elaine shook her head. No, just an empty photo album on her desk. She titled it, Places We'll See. That night, back in her motel, Nguyen couldn't sleep. She spread all the case photos across the bed. Truck, tent, the father's note, the gravesite, the drawing, the Polaroid. She lined them up in order, then stopped at the child's drawing, the stick figures, the sun, the mountain. There were faint pencil dots in the sky she hadn't noticed before, 3 of them arranged in a triangle. She pulled the Polaroid closer. In the background, behind Robert's head, 3 bright points of reflected light appeared in the same pattern. Probably sunlight catching on wet stone. Or maybe not. She overlaid one photo on the other, aligning the mountain ridges. The dots matched perfectly. The drawing wasn't imagination. Lily had been sketching what she saw, and whatever she saw had stayed watching them until the very end. The Hammond case became legend. Documentaries aired, podcasts rehashed every theory, and tourists began visiting the trail, where they vanished. The town built a small overlook near the recovery site with a plaque that read, "Sometimes the mountain hides you to keep you safe. Sometimes it lets you go to be remembered." Visitors left flowers, photos, even toy cameras. The story had become something larger, a parable about love and loss and time folding in on itself. But for Nguyen, it was never legend. It was a file, a weight, a collection of small facts that refused to rest. On the 1-year anniversary of the discovery, she hiked up one last time alone. Snowmelt had turned the ravine into a trickling stream. Moss covered the indentation where the truck had once lodged. She placed a single Polaroid print, the recovered one of Robert smiling, on a flat rock, then turned her camera on herself and took another shot facing the canyon. The picture developed slowly in the cold. When the image appeared, her heart skipped. In the reflection behind her, just above her shoulder, stood 2 faint figures, a man in a cap, a girl with wind-blown hair, looking straight at the camera. She blinked hard, checked the background. No one there, just wind, trees, and sun cutting through the cloud. She laughed once, softly. "Guess you really did see the stars," she whispered. Nguyen left the photo there, tucked under the rock beside the old mirror shard. Then she hiked back down before dusk. By the time the next team visited the site, both photos were gone. In Missoula, Elaine Hammond kept the Polaroid box on her kitchen shelf. Every few months, she'd take out the drawing and trace the sun with her finger. She told visitors she didn't feel haunted, only watched over. "When storms roll in, I like to think they're just saying hello," she said. The town never stopped talking about them. Truckers on Highway 93 swore they sometimes saw headlights flicker along the ridge after midnight, 2 small lights where no road existed. Fire crews called it the lantern route. Even years later, when newer cases came and went, the Hammonds stayed in every conversation. Not as ghosts, but as proof that some vanishings end not in terror, but in peace, if you listen long enough to what the mountain is trying to return. And sometimes, on perfectly clear nights, when the valley is silent and the wind is still, the reflection of those twin headlights dances faintly across the ravine walls. No one chases them anymore. They've already found their way home.